What is up, guys? Welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you about the risks of using glyphosate to treat your weeds both in your yards and on your food plots. Now, I want to be upfront and say that this is not going to be a video about using glyphosate to treat our food supply and then eating the food that has been treated by that glyphosate. That's something for another video for another creator on another channel. This is going to be a video about what risks you may be incurring when you're exposing yourself to glyphosate to treat things like your weeds. So, all right, I want to get into three things: how glyphosate may affect your health, it may affect your wildlife, and how it may affect your soil. So let's get into it. So, okay, the first thing we need to look at is that glyphosate on the bottle itself, it recommends that we wear PPE or personal protective equipment when we're using it. Now, the PPE that is recommended is eyewear, just safety glasses, and rubber gloves. So the worry of the label is that it can cause skin irritation or eye irritation if you were to splash it on you, and especially if you splash the concentrate on you. Now, I also like to wear long pants when I'm applying it, but I know some people will go as far as to wear a full Tyvek suit, a respirator, and goggles when they're applying it as well. And whatever makes you comfortable, go ahead and do that. But the only requirement or the only actual recommended PPE that's on the label itself is to wear rubber gloves and eyewear, just in case you splash it on yourself, because it can irritate the skin or irritate your eyes if it does get on you. So that's definitely something you do want to consider. Be careful when you're putting it into your water tanks and then mixing it with water, because when it's at its concentrate level, that is when it's going to be the most irritating if you get it on yourself. And it's also a good idea to check out that label and read through it. There's a lot of good information on there. Some labels will even tell you like how long you should wait after spraying before you plant certain plants or certain seed varieties. So there really is a lot of good information on there. It definitely pays to go read through that before you do use a chemical like glyphosate. Okay, so now that we know that glyphosate requires a little bit of PPE to apply, but what about that California gardener who was awarded $289 million by a jury for their belief that it caused him cancer? So it's important to look into the specifics of that case. So the jury awarded the gardener the money because they believed that the chemical company was at fault because they didn't warn the gardener that the product might cause cancer. And then they cited research by the World Health Organization that found that glyphosate probably causes cancer. So those two words, though, are very distinct to keep in mind when you're thinking about this. They found that might and probably cause cancer are what awarded that $289 million. There wasn't any actual definitive proof, and that's important to keep in mind. And with the California gardener, there was no proof that he wasn't overusing the chemical, and many believe that he was most likely using it every day, every week, maybe wasn't mixing it correctly, and that may be the reason why he had a correlation to the chemical and developing cancer. Now, when we talk about glyphosate, there has been a ton of research into it. There's been over 4,000 scientific studies on it to try to prove that it does cause cancer, and none of them have been able to do so. That's why the EPA, the FDA, as recently as last year have said that glyphosate, when used correctly, is not known to cause cancer. So I know you can go on the internet and there's all of these other videos about people talking about how bad glyphosate is. And the thing is that they're using a lot of proof via correlation. Now, correlation does not prove causation. And I kind of lost you there, I'll explain with a quick example. So there is a correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. Now, ice cream sales obviously are not causing shark attacks. Why they happen in a correlation is when it gets warm outside, people buy ice cream, people go swimming in the ocean. But one does not cause the other. So correlation does not prove causation. So using all of this correlation to prove that glyphosate is doing all of these things isn't logically sound. So Again, I'm not saying that in the future there won't be some research that finds that glyphosate does do all of these bad things, but there's been over 4,000 scientific studies so far, and so far they have not been able to prove causation out of the correlation. So when we're talking about this, if you don't want to use glyphosate, I'm not saying you have to go out and use it. Everybody should take the precautions that they see fit. It's just there isn't any actual scientifically sound evidence to prove that glyphosate causes all of these bad things that people are saying it does. Now, there's certain correlations between many other things that could be doing that as well. So, for example, Penn State University did a research on toxicity levels certain things have for humans. Well, they found that things like salt and vinegar are more toxic to humans than glyphosate is. Now, that's kind of scary if you think about that, if you're worried about glyphosate, because we actually eat salt. We're not eating glyphosate, right? So the other thing is, if you were to go through your house and look for many household cleaning items and other aerosol type things, all of those are way worse for us than glyphosate is. So especially things like aerosols, like if you use air fresheners or hairsprays, those things are way, way, way worse than glyphosate is. And you're actually spraying those in your house or on your body, where you're only spraying glyphosate in your yard maybe a couple times a year, or if you're treating a food plot, maybe a couple times a year. So really your exposure to these bigger things or these bigger threats is higher, and your exposure to this smaller threat like glyphosate is a lot lower, yet some people might not have their worry in the right place adjusted to the appropriate risk that you're inheriting when using these products. And then there's cleaning products as well. Many of the cleaning products that you use in your house on a weekly basis are way more toxic than glyphosate is when used correctly. Okay, so glyphosate shouldn't be too harmful to us as long as we're using it correctly and we're using the appropriate PPE, maybe even going above and beyond and using a little bit of extra PPE. But what is it doing to our wildlife, right? We're literally spraying it on a food plot to kill off weeds. What happens if a deer comes through and eats those weeds? And I know some guys will say that they don't spray glyphosate or chemicals on their plots because they don't want the deer eating those chemicals. Then they harvest the deer, and then now they're eating through a roundabout way the chemical. Well, if that's the reason why you're not spraying, your deer are still going to have glyphosate sprayed on plants that they eat, because if there's any ag in your area, they're all being treated with glyphosate. And so the deer are inevitably going to eat those beans or that corn. They're going to eat glyphosate. So even if you keep it off of your plots, you're not preventing your deer herd from eating those things. So that's not a good reason not to do it. But if you don't want to do it, that's still fine. I'm not saying you have to. But what happens to the deer if they eat it? Well, not a whole lot, right? We all have trail cameras out. Mine are out right now. I actually just checked them. There's still a bunch of big bellied does and bucks just coming into velvet. I would expect that some of the does have dropped their fawns already. I haven't seen any yet. They usually don't come out for a little while yet. But as we're looking at these trail cam pictures or videos, we're not seeing sickly deer that have been horribly malnourished or are under some influence of these chemicals. They're not tipping over dead in the woods. They're very capable of processing any chemical that might be on the plant at the time, or avoiding it. They may be able to smell it, and then they don't eat that plant until a couple days after the chemical has begun to break down a bit. So no, there's no negative effect on a deer by them eating something that was treated with glyphosate. And the thing is too, is deer are grazers. They only graze through an area. They don't actually sit and eat on it like you might witness on like a feeder or a bait pile if you're able to do that. They just graze through. So even if they were to graze through a field that's been treated with glyphosate, they're only taking a couple mouthfuls and then they're onto another field that hasn't been. So out of all the food they eat in a day, it's a very small fraction. Their bodies are able to conquer whatever negative effects it might have on it. We all have bacteria that very easily kills glyphosate. So the glyphosate's neutralized very easily and we don't have anything to worry about. So then by the time that you were to harvest that deer, cook it up, put it on your plate, like there's just nothing left of that glyphosate. The bacterias have all neutralized it, and you don't have anything to worry about. So all right, we know that glyphosate isn't too harmful to us as long as we're using it correctly, and we know that it's not too harmful to our wildlife population either. So what is it doing to our soil though, right? Like, there's been a lot of studies, non-scientific and scientific. We've all seen those pot studies where guys will fill some pots up and then soak them down with glyphosate, and they'll be like, see, look, this didn't grow as fast as my untreated one did. And that's 100% correct. If you oversaturate your ground with glyphosate, it will stunt the growth of the seeds, but only for a short amount of time. Like, I'm talking like only a couple days. So if you are going to oversaturate your ground, you're going to stunt that seed growth right away, but within a couple of days, it's gonna catch right back up and it's gonna be growing like normal. So yeah, don't oversaturate your seeds, right? Use the appropriate spray rate. Like I said earlier, as long as we're using this chemical correctly, we don't have much to worry about. So yes, if you're gonna completely soak your soil in glyphosate, it's going to have a negative effect. But if you use the appropriate spray rate, and that is 2 quarts per acre of concentrate mixed with water, and guys ask all the time, how much water? Well, the water is dependent on your spray rate of your sprayer. So I have this sprayer here, and the spray rate on that, once you then have to calculate the spray rate to how fast you're moving, and that becomes a lot of math. So what I do to simplify it down a little bit is basically I put enough water in the tank to make sure that I will be able to cover the entire plot at least once. Then once I've covered the entire plot, I take a look at how much liquid is left in the sprayer. If it's half full, I know that I can go over the whole plot one more time at the same speed. If it's, say, a quarter full, I know that I can go over the whole plot one more time, but I have to double my speed. So that's what I do, is just get one spraying down. You'll at least get some chemicals on the entire plot without overspraying. And then whatever you have left, just empty it on the plot. And it's not the end of the world if you don't get it perfectly even across the entire plot. We always have the opportunity to spray more than one time. In other videos, I've recommended spraying 3 times before you put your plots in, and that is true. But in the nature of this video, if you don't need to spray 3 times, there's no reason for you to spray 3 times. If one spraying kills everything off and you're not left with hardly anything left out there, there's no reason to spray that 2nd or 3rd time if all you're going to be doing is spraying chemicals into your soil and not actually onto the leaves of the things that you're trying to kill off in your plots. So that's where I get with, does this harm your soil? Well, first off, you shouldn't be spraying so much that it's even getting to the soil. If you have a thick stand of weeds and you spray, all of that chemical should be sticking to the leaves of the plants and not actually like dripping off of them down into the ground. If that's happening, you're spraying way too much. So does it affect the soil? Yes. If you apply it correctly, it shouldn't even be a factor for you. And it's also important to note, and I've mentioned this in other videos, that glyphosate is not exactly as strong as everybody thinks it is. The natural environment out here does a very good job of conquering it. So if you were actually going to try to spray your glyphosate out of a sprayer and you filled your sprayer with pond water, the bacteria in the water will actually attack the glyphosate and will neutralize it. So when you go to spray, you're not actually going to get a kill on your weeds because the bacteria in the pond water already neutralized your glyphosate. Or you won't get as good of a kill, I should say. Maybe you still will get some kill. But that being said too, that same bacteria is in the soil. So when that chemical gets down into the soil, that bacteria grabs hold of it, locks it up, and basically eats it and destroys it so that it's not there anymore. So that's something to consider. You know, glyphosate does not even require a chemical applicator's license to use. Anybody can go into a store, buy it, spray it on their plots or in their yards or whatever. It's not that harsh of a chemical. So when I was talking about that correlation earlier, there are a lot harsher chemicals that require that chemical applicator's license to spray, And farmers are spraying those chemicals on your food and stuff as well. So like, to say that the correlation lands squarely on glyphosate, I don't know how the target got set on glyphosate when there's so many other options out there as well, right? And when we're talking correlation too, you can go back to the things like the aerosols being sprayed in our houses. There's a correlation to the increased use in aerosols and all of the bad things also. So that's why it's been difficult to prove that glyphosate is the one that's causing all of the bad, because correlation does not prove causation. And where I'm getting with this entire video is that if you use glyphosate as directed, you don't overuse it, you don't overspray it, you're wearing the appropriate PPE, you're taking the appropriate precautions when using it, you have absolutely nothing to worry about, because you're only using it a handful of times a year, and there's other harmful things to you that you're using far more times per year in your house, not just in your yard. And those are the things that if you want to place some of your fear and worry on, you should maybe shift it towards those instead of on something like glyphosate, which does an amazing job at getting your food plots weed free so that you can have a perfect stand of fall food going into the hunting season. Or clean up your flower beds, get those weeds out of them, get those weeds out of the cracks in your driveway, whatever. Glyphosate is an amazing tool to use as long as it is used correctly. And isn't that the same with everything in the world? If you don't use it correctly, it can be very bad. If you use it correctly, it can be very useful. And so just take the appropriate precautions that you feel safe or make you feel safe, and go out and use it correctly. Make sure you read that label and enjoy. Now, if you guys feel like you got some value out of this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments. So I'll see you down there, and I'll catch you on the next one.